All right. My name is Paige Friske. Today is April 11th. The time is 4:05. We are at the Pewaukee VFW, post 9537 in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. I am interviewing Stefanie Rous, who was born on 2/28 of 1970 in Cumberland, Wisconsin, and served in the Gulf War era between the years of 1987 and 1997. Stefanie was an E4 in the Army and served as a communications and radar repair. This interview is being sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Well, good afternoon, Stefanie.
Good afternoon.
All right, let's just kick this off. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was actually still in high school when I joined. I was 17.
Yes. So I know that you enlisted while you were in high school, like you just said. Can you talk more about that process?
Sure. My best friend and I decided to join on the delayed entry system, was what it was called back then. So we were actually able to go to drill up until we graduated and went to basic training.
All right. And then once you joined the military, how did your further education, like something like a college or university, how did that play into your service?
Well, after basic training, we had to go to school for our MOS, our specialty. So I went to Fort Sam Houston and went to school for medical records specialist.
Right. And so can you tell me about that kind of schooling and just your early weeks of training and how you adapted to military life?
The biggest shock was probably just, basic training and trying to adapt, and, you get up at a certain time, you eat at a certain time, you have to do PT, physical training, nonstop.
Yeah.
So, it was hard, but you had a battle buddy that you were kind of paired up with, and we tried to keep each other sane.
Yes.
Which was good.
So in which branch did you enter and why did you choose that branch?
Well, I started out in the Army National Guard. And I can show you my uniform from back then. Oops. So this is actually the Bucky Badger patch because I was with the 13th Evac Hospital in Chippewa Falls, northern Wisconsin. So since I was in the Army National Guard, it was easier to go into active duty Army versus switching branches.
Yeah. So how is the National Guard different than traditional service?
National Guard is, 1 weekend a month. So you do training for a couple of days and then you have to go for 2 weeks, typically in the summertime. So active duty, you're totally submersed. It's all the time military, which in the National Guard, it was military during the weekend, and then you would go back to doing what you would normally in a civilian life.
Yeah.
So it was a little different, and being in the military when I went active duty, and I would tell people I was in the National Guard, they're like, "Oh, that's a part-timer," but I was part of a hospital unit, so a lot of the people that I was with, actually, if they were doctors, they were doctors in the civilian life, so.
Very transferable.
Right.
And how did you transition from the Army National Guard into Army Active Service?
After I finished my first MOS, and I went to college for a little bit and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to go to school for, so I decided to go into the military full-time.
What is your most vivid memory of your time in training or in school?
Probably when I jackknifed a 5-ton tractor trailer. They told me, "Oh, you can drive it, and he's like, you needed to make a sharp turn, and the cars were backing up on the street, and I was just mortified. But
yes, I can imagine.
They ended up getting it out.
That's good. What was the best part of training or school?
You know, I got to travel a lot of places in the military. You know, I was stationed in Germany for a couple of years. I think that was my most favorite. And I was able to travel to some other countries during that time. And probably the second most favorite is the camaraderie, you know, with the
That's
people.
if you're comfortable sharing, what was the worst part of training for you?
Getting punished for what other people did or didn't do because it was, you were treated as a whole,
Yeah.
you know, and that was a challenge for everybody to learn. You know, you're used to doing your own thing, right?
Yeah.
But in the military, if one person messes up, the whole group messes up and gets punished for it.
Yeah, definitely the win as a team, lose as a team mentality.
Right, exactly.
What was the most difficult part of training for you?
Some of the schooling, like when I went to school for radar repair, it was a lot of electronics. And even though I knew the material, it was just like the testing aspect of it. That was probably the hardest part.
Yeah. Were you like as a woman in the military, which is somewhat newer, especially in terms of like the American military, were you trained differently than the men on your unit, or did you see any differences there?
Yeah, there was definitely differences. You know, like when I went active duty, my first MOS was field artillery radar repair, and after school, well, even in the school, I was the only female in the class. Yeah, so that was a little different, a little challenging, you know.
Definitely.
I had to stay in a different barracks. I couldn't stay in the same barracks because there weren't any other
Yeah.
females. So that was kind of a challenge, you know, not being with your classmates. But I did find some good friends, you know, that watched out for me. They were
Yeah.
like my big brothers, you know, and so if people harassed me, you know, they would step in.
Yeah.
So
That's
that was
always
good.
good.
Yeah.
What was your first assignment after basic training?
Well, after basic training, I was still in the National Guard, so I
Mhm.
went to school for that, and then I came home. When my first assignment when I was active duty was in Germany, a little town called Kitzingen, about an hour south of Frankfurt. Is probably the most well-known place that people know.
Mhm. All right. So I know that you've served in a lot of different places through our conversations. Do you want to briefly go through an overview, and then we're going to go more in depth to different places? But if you want to give an overview of your schools and your like active service.
Okay, so like just a quick timeline
Yeah.
of the whole thing. Okay, let's see if I can remember all this.
Don't worry.
So I went to basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And then from there, I went to Fort Sam Houston, Texas for school for 2 months. Came back to Wisconsin and then when I went active duty, that schooling for radar repair was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That was about a year. And then from there, I went to Germany, where I spent almost 2 years. And then I was involuntary reclassed, which means I had to go back to school again. So I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for, I think that was a little over a year, and that was for communication specialists. Then from Fort Gordon, I went to Colorado Springs. So I was stationed there for a while, which I loved.
Yeah.
It was a great duty station. And then after Colorado, I got out, went back to the National Guard, and then ended up going back to Colorado and went to school for medical equipment repair in Denver.
All right.
And then I finished out my time back in Wisconsin in the National Guard.
Lovely. What do you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
I think just being part of the whole and helping each other get through it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't serve in a conflict or during a war, like my older sister and nephew did. But it's important because it takes everybody to do it. We had to issue TA-50 and stuff to the people that were going to Saudi.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So I know that you mentioned your time in Germany, and there's one specific story I remember from our original conversations about that time.
Okay.
So can you kind of talk about that, your kind of friendships and camaraderie that you formed while serving?
Yeah, it was, a good group of people, and I was fortunate enough to meet up with one of my best friends. I was going to Texas for work, and so we were able to get together after 20 years, which was awesome. And then most recently, New Year's Eve, we all got on a Zoom call. There was probably 10 of us, I think, that were stationed together in Germany. And so it was fun to catch up with everybody.
Yeah. So how did you serving overseas, how was that different than maybe somebody who would have stayed in the US for their entire service?
I think you become a closer knit group because you don't have any family there. They become your family, you know. You can't, you could call, on the phone. We didn't have cell phones back then. So it was like, I don't know, I think like $5 a minute.
Oh,
So when you
wow.
called home to your parents, it's an 8-hour time difference.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of schedule that, and they were usually pretty short calls because it was expensive, know. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is that you really learn to make kind of your new family there.
Yeah, for sure. What was the best part of your service experience?
Traveling, I think, getting to see different places and live in different places. It gives you a different perspective on life in general. It's going to different countries where they don't have it as well as we do.
Yeah.
Makes you appreciate our freedom even more.
Exactly. So in your time in Germany, how were you prepared for that?
I don't think I really was prepared for it. I didn't, I was 19, I think it was by that time, and I didn't know what to expect. They put you on a plane, you find your way. I mean, and they didn't give you directions. You just kind of figured it out. And I remember, walking through the airport, and they had like M16s or something like that on their back, and I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? Because we didn't have that here, that was probably the one moment that I was like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? But it teaches you that you can find your way. You just have to have some persistence, and you can do it.
So while you were overseas, was there any opportunity to travel within Europe, or were you pretty confined to your base in Germany?
There were times that we were confined to the base because it was during Saudi, and when there was a high threat, we were on lockdown and not allowed to go off base. Or if we could go off base, sometimes we were restricted to public places that would typically have a lot of Americans, because that would be a target. We were restricted from that. But I was able to travel. When I was over there, my mom came to visit me because she loves to travel. And we went to Czechoslovakia, Austria, France, Liechtenstein. I think that was about it for our little tour that we did, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing, what was your first trip to Austria like? Maybe not on purpose.
Not on purpose, but some friends, we went skiing and didn't know where we were going, but ended up skiing down the wrong side of the mountain. We started out in Germany and ended up in Austria and didn't quite realize it. And it was a little bit of a challenge to find our way back. But we were asking people, but they're like, we don't speak English. And which was kind of the frustrating part because we knew that the majority of the people had to take 4 years of English. But finally, this older lady came up to me and she like tugged on my sleeve and she's pointing to the sign. So we knew which bus to get on to go back to Germany. So we made it without getting in trouble.
That's very good.
Yeah.
So going to Germany where the language is obviously different, was there a barrier for you to like getting integrated into that kind of life?
Yes, because I mean, I took Spanish in high school. That was like the only language that I sort of knew and not very well. So when we got to Germany, it was everybody went through a mandatory like 2-week course, only 2 weeks, just to learn, a little bit about some of their customs and try to learn how to speak the language. But even that varies, from like the northern part of Germany to the southern part. The dialect is quite a bit different, but I learned to carry a little translation book around because we didn't have Google back then or, cell phones to cheat.
Definitely.
So, but.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, we'd bring out like the book if you go to a restaurant just to figure out what you're ordering. So you make it work.
Yeah. So once you came back to the States, could you share a little bit about your time in Colorado and what you were doing while you were there?
Sure. When I was in Colorado Springs, I was in a signal battalion, so we set up like communications. So we'd go set up on the mountaintops. Had some fun experiences doing that. We had certain specific locations we had to set up in, and the mess tent or the cook's thing was on a rattlesnake nest. So that was, and I'm petrified to death of snakes. So that was interesting. But yeah.
Sounds a little scary, honestly. Yeah. Don't know how I'd do with that.
You'd shake your boots out and stuff like that in the morning.
Make
sure
nothing
your clothes
crawled out there.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about kind of your transition to civilian life after the military?
Yeah, they do give you like classes, but in kind of like a job counselor to sort of help you. Mm-hmm. And I say sort of because, when you're in the military, there's not a civilian translation that like sets up radios and communication equipment, So it was different in that aspect of like, okay, I have all this schooling now. What can I do with it in the civilian life? I ended up going into telecommunications, which a couple of the managers were prior military, which they know our work ethic, and so that's how I got into that.
Did you like continue any friendships after service? I know you talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did. I try to keep in touch with them. It's a lot easier now that we have like social media and stuff that we can communicate. And I actually asked them, the group that I was telling you about earlier, if they had any photos and that were appropriate to show. Yeah, they didn't come up with a whole lot for me, to be honest.
All right. So I know that you brought along some show and tell. If you want to go through
Okay,
that a little bit.
I'll go through it. And I didn't even get a chance to totally look at it, but we had to do PT tests. And I can't even remember how often we had to do them. It's every 6 months,
Oh my
at least
gosh.
once a year. So this one was, let's see, I don't even see a date on it.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, September 1988. So I was 18. They recorded the weather. Push-ups, I could do 29 push-ups.
That's pretty good.
Sit-ups was 68. And then we had to run 2 miles, and I ran that in 18 minutes and 22 seconds. I was not a runner.
Oh my gosh. Probably faster than I could do it.
So yeah, we had to pass a PT test or you'd get written up. That is one thing I have here. This one is a good conduct medal awarded for exemplary behavior, efficiency, and fidelity for the period indicated, and that was in 1993. So I would have been in, let's see, I was in Fort Carson, Colorado for that one. That's probably like a training exercise that we had to do. This is like some of our, this was from Fitzsimmons Army Medical School. This is when I went to school to repair medical equipment. I'm obviously not going to read it to you, but like this is some of the electronic stuff. We didn't have like hard textbooks. This is what they gave you. It was a printout to learn and go through. So that was kind of interesting. I don't even know what else I have in here, to be honest with you. Oh, I thought you might find this interesting. This is a military pay voucher.
Ooh.
Let's see if I can find. It's from Fort Sam, Houston, it looks like. So that's the first time I went to AIT. And it looks like my total pay was $568.
Wow, look at you.
That's for a month, I think. Had to have been. So, yeah, you don't make a lot of money in the military, that's for sure. But yeah. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, I think that's all I have in here. Yeah, there's a W-2 form. Yeah, it's ancient.
All right. So, how was your reception when you returned to civilian life?
You know, there wasn't really a reception. There wasn't, you just came home and you
Just carried on.
figured out what you were going to do next.
Was
Yeah.
that like a stressful experience for you?
You know, it was in the regards to like like my best friend and I that joined, she went on to college. So she stayed in the National Guard. She ended up getting deployed to Saudi and came back after a year, but then she was going to college and stuff like that. So they all kind of had their separate lives different, you know. They were all going to school and stuff. Well, I was in the military, and so it took, the stressful part was like trying to reintroduce yourself to your friends and family.
Yeah. So I know that you served before in the Guard. Did you do anything after active duty? I know you kind of talked about that.
After active duty, I went back into the National Guard. and that was for like a couple of years. And then during that time, I was working in telecommunications.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill, and how did that help you pay for college if you took advantage of it?
I did. For a period of time, I went to school for electronics since that was kind of what I had taken in the military, and I wanted to further that. So I was able to use the GI Bill for that, which was good, you know, to use that benefit. I tried to go to school when I was in Germany, but then we were deployed, so I wasn't able to keep up with the schoolwork and, you know, the training exercises that we had to go through. So.
All right. What are some of the life lessons you learned from military service?
Some of the life lessons, I guess, are, you know, just don't forget the people that helped you along the way. And even though, like, sometimes you might not talk to them for a while, still pick up the phone and call them. Yeah, just call them. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of friends like that, even friends I went to high school with, friends from the military, you know. That's probably one of the biggest ones.
And if you don't mind, I think we should take some time to talk about this box that's been sitting on our table.
Okay. So my grandpa was in World War II. He was also in the Army. And I had got some of his stuff after he passed. The red and green cord, it's a little bit hard to see. Probably tilt it up a little bit. But we were both in the 3rd Infantry Division, so we both have the same cord. And he was wounded in World War II, so his Purple Heart is here. All of his ribbons are on top. Obviously, both of our names are Rous. This is the 3rd Infantry Division badge that we both wore, patch on your shoulder. This is my National Guard Bucky Badger. This is a piece of shrapnel that was from my grandpa's leg when he was wounded. He was airborne, and he was also a glider. And this little piece of camouflage sticking out is from his glider. And he had worn a piece of his glider around his neck for 50 some days without, you know, bathing. Sent it home to my grandmother. The envelope was like just full of grease and stuff, but she kept it. And an interesting side note of that, when my oldest sister and her oldest son were deployed to Iraq, we cut part of the glider up and put it on their dog tags to take with them while they were deployed. So, and then these are my grandpa's medals for, his was rifle and mortar. I was never trained on a mortar. I don't think we had that. Mine is rifle, and I think my hand grenade fell off. And then in the middle is our rank. We were both E4s. And then the US is what we always wore on our uniforms for our dress uniforms in the gold. And then his dog tags. And the silver ribbon is a German shoots and snare because I qualified on German weapons. And then the little flag holding that up is from my grandma, who was very active in the auxiliary. And my grandpa was in the VFW and American Legion, so they were very active in that.
Yeah, so I know you just mentioned your grandpa. Do you belong to any military affiliated organizations? Anything?
I am part of the American Legion post in Pewaukee, post 71. So with that, I have the camaraderie like I did in the military too, which is really nice. And I wanted to join because after going through my grandpa's funeral and one of my uncles, the honor guard, I was like, it just hit me watching the funeral. And like, who is going to take the place when these people aren't able to do this? Because a lot of them were older, and so I decided to join the American Legion, and I'm part of the honor guard to help with that, and it's a great honor to do that.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to talk about today that we didn't get a chance to?
There's a lot of stigmatism, stereotypes about people in the military, and it's some of it's not good, but it is good for a lot of people, and it teaches you a lot of things. If people are considering going into the military, it does teach you work ethic, camaraderie, which I don't know where else I would have learned that.
I just want to say, for me, it has been a real honor getting to know you and your service. As another woman who has served the country, I just think that you're a great inspiration, especially for young girls who might be worried about joining the military or anything like that. You are a good example for that, and I want to say thank you, first of all, obviously, for your service, but secondly, for being that role model and example for especially young girls that might be thinking about it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Of course. In closing, this has been the interview of Stefanie Rous regarding her service during the Gulf War era. My name is Paige Friske. The time is 4:42. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, of course, thank you for your service.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.